Welcome everybody to the first two of the five dysfunctions of a team. We're going to go a little bit more in depth into these than I would do in a bigger setting. We have done this presentation where I go through all five of those dysfunctions in one setting. We're going to break them down a little bit in this, and so I'll do the first couple in this meeting. Really, the goal is for you not only to know about what's in there, but be able to facilitate some of this for your own groups. And so I'm going to try to get a little more in depth with some of the activities so that you can see a little bit about how I do them and how you could kind of take them to your own organizations. My name's Hank Bowen. I work in student activities and organizations with Krista and Chris Cooper, and we work with student orgs on making sure that you have all the resources that you need to be successful. It is a very odd time to be running a student org. We realize that you may even have to be examined kind of what your purpose is as an organization for some of your groups. And so we want to make sure that you've got all those resources, particularly when you're only doing things like virtual meetings. We want to make sure that you're able to kind of lead a strong team. So I have shared my screen so that the PowerPoint is up. I'm not going to use it a lot. I've got a couple slides just to show you. I'm mostly going to kind of ask you some questions and talk back and forth and show you some other pieces. I do want to do introductions of everybody that's here, but not right this second, because there is an activity I want us to go through, and you'll get a chance to introduce yourself then. I will tell you that we're recording this so that we can show it to other groups that may not be able to be here today, but they may want to attend some of the future sessions on the third, fourth, and fifth dysfunction. And so we'll have those available for them. There is going to be a piece when we do the introductions in a little bit where we'll be sharing some more personal information about ourselves. While we're in this meeting, we'll try to agree to kind of be fully present and kind of share openly, but I will cut that part out of the video because it's not something you may not want to share with people that you're not in this group with. And so I will tell you that we are recording it for that, but I will cut your personal responses out for the personal histories in a little bit. So let's get going and not prolong it any more than we need to. So this really is about the book Five Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni, and it gets into how to deal with conflict and accountability within your student organization. You'll come into that accountability piece in some of the future sessions, but today's kind of two pieces are about trust and conflict and how important they are. And so I want to go through a couple things. I'm using this book, Five Dysfunctions of a Team. And this is what it looks like. And I'm going to stop sharing that because that really is all the much of the PowerPoint I have. This is the book. If you are interested in looking at it, it's not written as one of your typical leadership books. It's written as a kind of a novel. So it starts, the majority of the book is a story. The pages are pretty quick to read. Patrick Lencioni writes a bunch of these books. They're leadership fables. This one is pretty good for team culture and making sure that your team is fully functional. He's got some other ones. I did a session at Workshop Carousel about death by meeting. Once you get out into the work world, he's got some really interesting ones about 3 signs of a miserable job and about bad CEOs. So even if you're not in a business or management setting, they're pretty interesting for the workforce. So I do some work with groups, and I have done some work with groups in the past that just struggled and could not get it together. And you can use this book, and there is a workbook I'll show you as well. You can use the book and the workbook to kind of try to get some teams back on track. But I like to take it with newly formed groups or with newly formed officer teams and work on it not after the fact as dysfunctional teams, but before it gets really started good on how to make a better functioning team. So you can kind of approach it either way depending on what your need is. You just do it different types. We use it in student government every year, so I'm the student government advisor as well. We use it with that group coming together, and we work with this in new organizations as they're getting started every year. So if you're interested in the book, you usually can get it at the library. Even if they don't have a physical copy, a lot of times they'll have the ebook. You can just read it without even having to go get that book. So let's dive into some of that. The first dysfunction that is listed in the book is called the absence of trust. This is very weird. I like to present and I like to do presentations like this. Doing them virtually is a little new for me, and I'm a little uncomfortable with it, I'll be honest. And so I'm not having you all in front of me to give me head nods or to kind of those verbal cues is interesting. So I may ask some questions. Please feel free to unmute yourself and kind of answer along as we go. So that would make it a lot easier. So let me ask you first, what is trust? How do you define trust? And it could be different for everybody, but some of y'all, how do you define that?
Hey, I feel like it's being able to rely on other members, I guess.
Okay. Being able to rely on people. Anything else? Anybody else? So sometimes we have this tendency to think of trust as this ability to predict behavior. You know, I know that Krista and I work together. We've worked together for many years. So Krista has always gotten her projects done. So I trust that she will do that in the future. All right. And I'm just looking at names. Bree. Let's say Bree is a member, and Bree has always volunteered to work at any of our events. So I trust that she's going to do that in the future. That's not exactly what trust is. It's not this predictor of things based on how we've acted. Real trust is being willing to kind of open yourself up and letting people see the real you. Okay. Because what we tend to do when we think of it the other way is, oh, well, Hank didn't one thing he was supposed to do at one time, so I can't trust him, or I trust that he's going to goof it up again. And so we sometimes think of trust as this thing that is earned over time based on behavior. But what we're talking about in this sense is this real vulnerability-based trust, that we have admitted the truth about ourselves to each other. And that's important, because when we are willing to admit true things about ourselves and really open ourselves up and really be vulnerable, it takes away some people's ability to get into the political junk. And I don't mean national politics or governmental politics, but if you've been in any organization, you know that politics itself exists and all those things. We're willing to be vulnerable and trusting. Don't waste as much time and energy in the garbage politics of organizations. Okay. So when you're getting with a group, with a team, you really want to do some things to build trust within the group. Let me ask you a couple questions. You don't have to answer them, but ask these questions to yourself for your group. We're talking about dysfunctions of a team, functions of a team, how to be a better team. The first question you have to ask yourself is, are you really talking about a team here? I don't know the size of all your organizations. We'll get into that in a little bit. Looking at some of the lists, and don't forget to put the name of your organization in the chat. There's a couple of you. I see Hosa and Sakai in there, but everybody don't forget to drop your organization name in the chat so that we can keep that for attendance records. But if you're looking at making a team and being a cohesive team for your entire organization, and you've got 50, 60 members, that's probably not going to be effective, because that's too many people to really work with. Hopefully you've got some kind of subgroups, committees, your executive team, whatever it is, and that's what you want to be working with in this case. You can't really get into that vulnerability-based trust with that large group. Okay, so we're talking about small groups and maybe your exec team within a committee, whatever that may be. So you want to do some things to kind of build that trust with everybody. A couple ways to do that. The first that I like to do, and I'd like to do now with you all, since we've got a pretty small group, I think we can do it pretty quickly. The first is the personal histories exercise. And I'm going to I'm going to type some things in the chat so that you can take these notes and have them. They should be in your chat history anyway. So the personal histories exercise, and I'm going to answer for myself as well. I'm going to ask all of you to kind of in turn your cameras on if you can, or at least unmute yourself and answer these questions. So here's the questions. And I want you to ask for yourself today kind of what organization you're representing today. But the personal histories exercise generally, where are you from? How many people, or where did you grow up? And you can define that how you want, and you can give as much detail as you want. How many people were in your household growing up? And then what was the most challenging part of growing up for you? And I mean, what was the toughest part of your inner childhood? I'm talking literally, what was the toughest thing about being a kid for you? So I will start and then let you all kind of take turns. And as you're doing that, I'm going to type those questions so that you'll have them. So I'm not representing the group. So I grew up in Williamston, North Carolina. It's about 45 minutes from here, northeast. In This is Martin County. This is northeast North Carolina. This is one of the poorest congressional districts, they say, one of the poorest areas, very, very rural in the United States. Growing up, there were four of us, my parents, myself, and my younger sister. And then the toughest part for me about growing up was I am in a semi-military family. My dad was an Army reservist up until about a week ago. He's finally retired. And so he was very much a incredibly structured person working for the government for all that time. And everything had to be a certain way, and everything has to be by the book, and everything has to be documented. And so that has been always challenging because it's hard sometimes to be fun, and it's hard to sometimes just relax because everything's got to be done a certain way. And so that's what I would say, kind of growing up in that environment, very loving, but also very, very, very structured, was kind of the toughest thing for me growing up as a child. I think that hopefully you've all seen some good examples in this activity, just with the four of you and me, of why I like to do this. No matter what group size, I have never done this activity and something didn't come up that was very, very deep and personal and sometimes very difficult. From family members' deaths to drugs, jail, parents being in jail. We all have kind of different things we've gone through, and sometimes it's surprising what people on our team have experienced in the past that we may never have known. Sometimes you'll see similarities in the answer. Several of you are, several of you from different states and had this big adjustment to move to the South. And that is, I've always lived here and I know it's different. And so you have different things that you've experienced. A couple of you from Michigan, not exactly in the same place in Michigan, but for us in North Carolina, everything is the North. And so I get that it's a huge state, but would you ever have known necessarily two people in the same group are from Michigan, especially if you've moved to North Carolina before coming to college? It may not come up. I like the personal histories exercise because it gives people a chance to kind of share a little bit, something very quickly, but it kind of shows people why you may be the way you are about certain things. And Krista, don't answer, but if you ask people that were with me kind of how I act or how I am, you may often get an answer that I am kind of hard-headed and have to have it my way, or that it has to be done a certain way, or that I'm a little rigid. And then when you do the personal histories exercise with me, you get to see, well, maybe it's because of that background. And you know, some of y'all, you talked about moving here during middle school, or you may have people that have moved more recently, and if you've ever noticed that they're a little standoffish, it may be because they've got this kind of aversion to making very close friends because they've had to leave friends behind, if that makes some sense. Or people have things going on in their life that you just didn't know about. And so I appreciate you all sharing that with everybody. What I will also say about that activity is not only have I always seen something be shared that was deep and incredibly personal, I have never ever seen it turn into something negative that I wish we hadn't gotten into. People are always incredibly respectful of that. And so it takes some facilitation skill, but it is always worth it. What I would add is that you have to create the environment that people can share in. That does not mean that you can come back to whatever is said outside of that meeting just whenever you feel like it. It's not something where you can go up to somebody else that shared something and say, so tell me about your mom's drug problem. And that's a real thing. So be respectful of that, but definitely be willing to get into that. So that kind of gets you started with that. If you want to get a little deeper into people, I would definitely recommend doing some kind of personality assessment. There are some that are offered through the university, different people. Some of them are going to cost your group, and some of them are not. But they are worth it. You can do some of the ones that cost for free. I don't necessarily recommend that because I'm probably not allowed to, but I use them all the time, and we've done them with our staff. And you don't necessarily have to do them officially, but you do want to get some ideas of that. And so a lot of people less now use the Myers-Briggs test, but I still enjoy it and think it's fun. You can do some, you can Google and find a free kind of unofficial Myers-Briggs inventory. You can do Strengths Finder. Those do cost some money, but you get a book and you get this code, and you get to find kind of what your top strengths are for the people in your organization. To me, strengths is very, very valuable, and if you've got that ability to do so, I recommend it. Krista can provide you with some more information because we've got a couple people within our overall staff that can do it, and Krista has worked with that many times in the past. I think strengths is very valuable. How many of you have ever heard of the 5 love languages? And you can put the hand up thing if you want to click on the hand up feature. If you've ever heard of the 5 love languages, the 5 love languages is a book by Dr. Gary Chapman. I don't think I have my copy of it here, but the 5 love languages is great for couples. They also wrote a version called the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace. Okay, so we get out of love languages and now we get into languages of appreciation. And I'm dropping a link in the chat that you can get to later that will tell you a little bit about those things, but also give you a quiz where you can get people to take it. It's always great when you've got a group that you want to be closer with, if you can kind of share with each other how you like to be congratulated, how you like to be appreciated. And so there's 5 basic types. They're very similar to the love languages, but now we're talking about appreciation. Not necessarily recognition, but appreciation, because we're focusing on the individual and who the person is, not just what they've done. Okay. And those 5 are words of affirmation, where you give people specific praise. Quality time, where you spend some personal and focused time and attention on the person. But that may be different for every person. Some people may want to hang out with you outside of the org structure. Some people may just want to work with you on a team or a project. And some people just want to have some time where you listen to them, but kind of figure out what that works for every person. So words of affirmation, quality time. The third one's acts of service. Maybe getting a task done for somebody, helping somebody dig out from kind of a rut they may be in if they're behind on something. Particularly in an organization, you may have kind of delegated stuff out. An act of service, maybe that you help them with something that they may be stuck on. Tangible gifts, and it does not have to be anything big. It shouldn't be anything expensive. What it should do is show the person that you have paid attention to who they are and the things that they like, and that you're willing, to do some of that. It could be as simple as buying them some of their favorite candy, a drink that they like from Starbucks, something very simple like that. And then the fifth one that we really try to avoid because it's not good is that physical touch one. Okay, but we're going to call it appropriate physical touch. We for a long time have tended to say physical touch is a bad idea outside of these romantic relationships because we shouldn't touch people. But some people's language of appreciation, just like their love language maybe, is physical touch. And so you can't just completely count it out. What you do have to do is, how do you do that appropriately? Is that a fist bump or a high five? I've got a 4-year-old and she wants a fist bump when she does something good. She's learning chores and she's learning appropriate behavior, and that fist bump or that high five is very reassuring. I'm well above the age of a college student, but a high five, a handshake, a fist bump, those may still be valuable for some people. And so you kind of have to, again, get to know people, get to build that trust with them, and do all that. That's a little bit about that trust one, okay? It doesn't seem to have anything to do with getting things done in your organization. It seems very literally touchy-feely in some ways. But what you're doing is building trust and you're being vulnerable with each other. And that's going to come in handy here in a second when we talk about the second thing, which is conflict. Let me go back to showing you my PowerPoint real quick because I want to show you this next slide on it. Or actually, it's not on there. There is something, if you see that third bullet, there is something we call this fundamental attribution error. And let me just kind of sum up what that means. We tend to think that other people are terrible people and that we are great people. We tend to think that if I do something wonderful, it's because I'm a wonderful person. If you do something really, really good, it's because you have been placed in a good position, you have been set up for success, you've had appropriate resources, but not that you are also a good person. If I do something bad, I tend to think it's because I've been set up for failure. I've not been given the resources I need. I don't have the right team around me. It's an external fault. But if you do something bad, it's because you're a bad person. Does that make sense to everybody that can't answer me? But just hopefully that makes sense. So this fundamental attribution error is all about the fact that we tend to think that, everything is somebody else's fault. When we get into this building of trust, particularly with that personal histories exercise, we start to think, okay, this is not a bad person. They've got some things they maybe have been through. That's why they may act the way they act. That's why they may do things the way they do. That's why they may feel the way they feel, but they're not a bad person. Okay. So you've got to kind of tackle this vulnerability-based trust before you can get into some of the other pieces, because otherwise you're not going to be willing to share things. So that's trust. You've got to, before you can get anything else, you've got to tackle that first. You've got to build that trust. And so that could be that you do a retreat. We do a lot of groups. You see, do the ropes courses and they do team building exercises. And we would be glad in our office to help you with any of that. If you want somebody to come in and if you've got a group, I would love to come in and do some of this Five Dysfunctions stuff with your team. But again, approach it from not dysfunction, but I'll call it, 5 steps of functional teams. But if you want somebody to come in and do team building with your group, the Rec Center offers, Campus Break and Wellness offers that. And I know that we are in a situation where there's social distancing in place, but that stuff can still be done, and it can be done virtually. I've done some stuff with groups virtually, but definitely take some time to tackle that vulnerability-based trust. Or if you just want somebody to kind of walk through those steps with your group, definitely let us know. So any questions or comments about the first step, the vulnerability-based trust? All right, then let's talk about the second dysfunction that a lot of teams face. And that is a lack of conflict. So we'll go back to the PowerPoint for a second. So lack of conflict, what you need to master that conflict to really be a functional area, a functional team. So if you'll see the chart on the PowerPoint there on the right side of that slide, you kind of get this destructive conflict versus destructive conflict along this conflict continuum, where on the very end of one way is artificial harmony, where everybody thinks everything is great, everything is fine. Oh, yes, I agree. No matter what, everything's perfect. And on the very other end, it's just personal attacks. It's not about the work that's being done. It's not about the organization. You just devolve into pettiness and just name calling. Okay. One side is constructive, but on the far end, not so. One end is destructive, all the way down to being very, very destructive and hurtful. Somewhere in the middle is this ideal conflict point where you want to make sure your organization is having conflict. So let's go ahead and get that out of the way now. Conflict is good. Disagreement is good. Okay. We think of conflict as being negative and it's bad for our group, but conflict is important. Conflict just means that people don't necessarily agree with everything, but they are willing to discuss it. I'll talk about why that's important here in a second. So in this conflict continuum, you got this ideal conflict point in the middle somewhere, right before it hits over to destructive. All right, you want to fall just short of that, which means it will feel uncomfortable. It will feel kind of wrong in some cases to have this conflict. You will, and you should feel like, oh, I don't know, whatever. But remember, we are not attacking the people. All right, we're not attacking anybody. We are having conflict, and we are having this discussion about what's best for the organization and its mission. Now go back. If you don't trust the people that you're working with, will you be able to have true conflict without it being personal and without it seeming personal? This is where we get into that fundamental attribute error. If you look at other people as being bad or wrong, then you're going to get into that conflict and you're going to take it personal and as an attack. So you absolutely have to have that vulnerability-based trust built up before you can really get into good conflict. Okay. So when you get into that conflict, you want to make sure that everybody understands that you're doing it for the mission of the org and for the betterment of your group. All right. Conflict does not mean that everybody agrees with everything in the end. It doesn't mean that it had to be your idea. It doesn't even mean that you have to have this consensus that everybody talks about. What it does mean is that everybody has said everything on their mind. Nothing gets left behind closed doors and nothing gets left without being said. Everything is laid out on the table. Okay. If you're part of a group and you don't feel heard, and I'm guessing that this has probably happened to some of you. I know it's happened to me in organizations. If you're part of a group or a team, an organization, however you want to define it, and you don't feel like you have been heard, you don't feel like you've been listened to, and they make a decision that may go against what you think, are you going to be able to fully commit to what's been decided? You may think so, probably not. Okay, you're probably going to have that doubt in your mind. But if people feel like they've been heard, they've been listened to, it's been discussed, they are more likely to kind of get behind it and go. Because the goal doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has to agree with everything. The goal is that once it's all said and done and decided, everybody is willing to say, I've had my say, I've shared what I want, I've listened to everybody, everybody has heard what I have to say, and this is what's been decided, and I am willing to support it. You don't have to agree with it, but you have to support it. Okay? And if you can't do that, you've got to keep having the conflict. You've got to keep discussing it. All right. So that's where the conflict comes in handy. You need to do a couple things. Conflict norming. You've got to make sure that people understand that that's a normal part. And that means giving real-time permission. So you may have two people in a meeting that seem to be having some conflict. They may start to disagree with something. In those cases, particularly when you're kind of getting the group used to this concept, it may be important for you to stop them and say, hey, just a second, Bree, Jocelyn, I just want you to say that this discussion is starting to get a little intense, but I want you to know that this is exactly what we need to happen. So I would encourage you to keep going with this conversation and don't leave anything out. Okay, so make sure people know that this is okay, that they may seem like they're holding back, particularly if you sense that and you feel like people are not sharing, to give them that real-time permission. Hey, don't forget, this is good conversation. Don't hold back from it. Let's let it all out there. It may also mean that you have to mine for conflict. So think about just like a gold miner that's digging away looking for some. You don't want to just try to stir up trouble for the sake of it, but you do want to kind of mine for conflict that you know is there. So if you see somebody making a face, call them, not call them out on it, but ask them, what do you think? But make sure that you are pulling all the information and all the thoughts from everybody. Once you get into that a little bit, it will always be good to make sure people understand each other's conflict style. And I want to show you a chart, and I'll be glad to kind of paste this in as well. But I'm going to show you the depth frequency conflict model chart, if you can see that Word document. Basically, it gets into, for people on your team, how deep does their argument go? And what we've done in our staff is make one of these sheets for every person on that team, put their name on it, and pass it around to everybody else, and have everybody else make a little mark. Where do you think Hank falls on this conflict model? Where do you think Jocelyn falls on this model? And go around. Does that person have very, very deep conflict towards the top, or do they have kind of very shallow conflict? Meaning, when they have conflict, is it about something very substantial, or do they seem to have conflict about things that don't really matter? So they've got low depth. And then, do they seem to have conflict? What kind of frequency? Is it very, very rare for them to have conflict, or is it very, very frequent? Okay. So where on this spectrum do you fall? Okay. You could do it ahead of time to let people say, well, this is where I feel like I am. You let them do one for themselves, let everybody else show where they think, and then kind of come back to sharing that, because some people don't realize how they appear to other people. They don't realize that they may think, oh, I don't have conflict with anybody, but if you ask everybody, they may say, you always got a problem with something. Maybe it's substantial, but it is frequent. Okay. Or maybe people feel like, I don't really have much to say, but your peers may think, well, you don't conflict a lot, but when you do, it's very, very important. So you need to speak up. But helping people through that and help people see that. So that's the first two. It's a little early, but I will stop. Again, that's the first two. And let me go and show you a little bit real quick. So we are, today we did the first couple. I'm having trouble getting out of the PowerPoint. I've got too much to scroll through. We've done the first two of these 5 dysfunctions. We talked about absence of trust, and we talked about fear of conflict. The next 3 that we'll go through in future sessions are about achieving commitment, embracing accountability, and focusing on results. So that's what we'll cover in future sessions. I encourage you to attend those as well to get that information walk through. Again, we'd be glad to work with your organization at any point if you want to do any of these activities or have somebody come in and work with the other ones on you. So anybody have any questions or anything that you want to throw out or ask before we close up for today? Throw my email in the chat also. What I do love about using Teams is that you can always go back and look at this even when you're done with this, because you've been in this call. It'll show up in your chats on Teams. So if you go in there and you want to know anything, it's there. But I would definitely think about doing something like I'm just writing personality assessments. That may be, again, Myers-Briggs. It may be True Colors. It may be strengths. Languages of appreciation. I'm just writing those down, and then my email's in there. If y'all have any follow-up questions later, feel free to reach out to me. All right. Well, thank y'all for coming.
Thank you, Hank, for presenting today. Thank y'all for coming, and we'll see you again next time. Have a great day.
Thank you.